Hello, everyone,
Hi,
and
everyone.
welcome to this evening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's telephone town hall with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. My name is Robin, and I'll be moderating the conversation this evening. During tonight's call, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad now or at any time during the call. You may also sign up for our newsletter by pressing star 6 at any time during the call. Again, if you would like to ask the Congresswoman a question, please press star 3 now. Press star 6 to subscribe to our newsletter. You can also participate in this evening's event in Spanish by pressing star 0 on your telephone keypad. Again, if you would like to participate in this evening's event in Spanish, please press star 0 on your telephone keypad. With that, I'd like to turn the call over to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Congresswoman, you are live and the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Robin. I so appreciate that. And welcome, everybody, to our August Tele-Town Hall. I'm so excited to be hosting it this month with you, especially in this medium and in this format. I know a lot of people are often traveling during August, or you're traveling with family or friends, and we find that sometimes doing teletown halls makes it easier for everybody to be able to hop in from wherever you are. So I hope that you're enjoying your August so far, and we're really excited, and I'm very excited to be able to catch up with you all some of the work that we've been doing in Washington up to this point and up to this August recess. So tonight, again, is about making sure that your questions are answered, your voice is heard, and that you're also getting the latest updates in terms of what we're up to in Washington, D.C. So if you have a question throughout this town hall, please dial star 3 on your phone. Once again, dial star 3 if you'd like to dial in with a question, and we'll connect you with an operator right away. That being said, I'd love to review really quickly a little bit of some of the points of what I'm going to be presenting tonight so that we can all follow along. The first thing I'm going to talk to you all about is some major progress that we've been making in terms of our advocacy for victims and people who have been targeted by deepfakes online. And that is legislation that we have presented with Senator Dick Durbin, known as the DEFIANCE Act. So I'll be providing an update on some major progress that we've made on that front. Secondly, one of the other large orders of business that I presented in our most recent session was introducing articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. So I'll be providing an update about that. Thirdly is something that is very important to our local community, which is a climate justice fellowship that we have worked with New York State to help fund and launch with federal money and state implementation as well. And it's a profoundly exciting opportunity for young people and people throughout our district that I want to make sure that we have access to and that people are aware about so that they can apply for this wonderful opportunity. And last, we'll just provide you with some constituent updates as well. So that's the 4 things: DEFIANCE Act, impeachment, climate justice, and constituent updates, and then we will open the floor for questions. So once again, if you do want to get in line for questions, the number is star 3 on your phone. So first things first, I want to talk about the DEFIANCE Act. I'm very thrilled to share with you all that the DEFIANCE Act recently passed the Senate unanimously, 100 in favor to 0. And, you know, that to me is nothing short of a miracle in these days of political polarization. We were able to get unanimous Democratic and Republican support in the Senate in order to pass the DEFIANCE Act. And what the DEFIANCE Act is, as I briefly previewed earlier, is that victims of sexually exploitative AI-generated materials online currently have little to no recourse if they are a victim of this kind of transgression. And right now, over 90% of deepfakes created online are of non-consensual sexually exploitative content. And so what that means, very sadly and very unfortunately, and we also see this sometimes starting to be used as a form of bullying, is that if you are if you are a woman seeking a role, trying to apply for a job, if you are a person of any gender that is trying to pursue or just trying to live your life, it is possible for somebody to take your likeness, take your image, take a photo of you online and put that into an AI generator and essentially put your face and generate sexually exploitative materials or video on it. And this, to us, is something that is unacceptable. It is a form of sexual and gendered violence and abuse, and we have to make sure that it is recognized as such. On top of that, it's very important that platforms have something to point to and turn to as a means of moderating and taking down this kind of non-consensual content. And if signed into law, what this bill would do would provide federal protections for survivors of incidents like these and allow them to take legal action against individuals who create or intentionally share or perpetrate harmful forgeries of sexually exploitative nature of other people. This is a powerful way that we can protect minors, that we can protect everyday people from being targeted from this kind of really just horrendous and violating type of act. And so the first major hurdle, once again, it has taken months for us to draft this. We have worked with survivor organizations, with sexual violence advocates. We have worked with individuals in the legal space, in the civil rights spaces, as well as in the technology spaces, to make sure that we're not just doing this with good intention, but that we're actually getting it right. And that entire coalition together has built a lot of broad consensus, and I'm very happy to report that that our first major hurdle, which was passing at the Senate, is now cleared. Now what we're doing is that we're taking it to the House. Currently, the House is not in session. They are in recess. But when we reconvene in September, my hope is that we will be gathering Democrats and Republicans alike in order to pass the DEFIANCE Act in the House. And once it passes both the House and the Senate, my belief and my hope is that we can get it to President Biden's desk and have it signed into law. So we are very excited to get to work on this. And get survivors of this kind of terrible act the justice that they deserve, as well as protecting millions of people from having it happen to them in the first place. So that's our update on Defiance. Once again, if you have questions on the Defiance Act, you can hit *3 on your phone to follow up with any questions you may have. Now, secondly, which is probably the biggest bit of news coming out from our office and our work in the last month or two, is that on July 10th of last month, so almost nearly a month ago, I introduced articles of impeachment against Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. And I found this to be very important and a very important thing to do. And I want to be clear that that the reason this is important to do is because whether it is anyone out in the street, whether you work for the post office or whether you work in the White House, no person is above the law. And in terms of the Supreme Court and in terms of Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, their failure to disclose financial gifts and their refusal to recuse themselves from severe and extreme conflicts of interest with people who had business before the court is just a problem of profound. It is just a problem of a profound nature. It undermines our democracy and undermines the integrity of the Supreme Court. It's exactly why impeachment was designed. This is a mechanism to preserve the integrity of our systems. And in a speech that I delivered on the House floor when I first presented the articles, I laid out the case very clearly. One being that the Constitution of the United States while in the White House, or whether it's a member of Congress or for anyone subject to impeachment, we often hear the bar of high crimes and misdemeanors. But actually in the judiciary, the Supreme Court and members of the judiciary are actually held to a much higher standard than everybody else when it comes to matters of impeachment. And that is what is known as the standard of good behavior. And essentially what our framers said was that the judiciary is of such importance, and it is of such gravity, particularly the Supreme Court, which are justices who are appointed for life, and they are not elected, and they cannot be reelected. They do not have to make a case to the American public, but once they are appointed, they are there for life, that the standard that they must meet for behavior must be much, much higher than it is for anybody else. And the standard of good behavior, in addition to the real breaches of lawful conduct when it comes to not fully disclosing financial, the justice's financial entanglements with people who have business before the court, is a profound problem. And so in addition to that, we're seeing the refusal to recuse from very significant cases. Justice Samuel Alito, he and his wife flew flags that were supportive. They were signals of support to January 6th insurrectionists. And yet Justice Alito refused to recuse himself in matters that would have implicated both he and his family, would have implicated their behaviors in a given case. Same thing with Justice Clarence Thomas as well. His wife, Virginia Thomas, was deeply involved in the proceedings of January 6th, and yet Justice Thomas did not recuse himself from matters pertaining to January 6th. And so these are very significant breaches of ethical conduct that have no place before the court. If an individual were seeking to become appointed to the Supreme Court, these types of behaviors would be nearly automatically disqualifying. And so I introduced articles of impeachment on July 10th. We are calling on Congress to hold the courts accountable because their extreme rulings on reproductive rights, federal regulations, and voting rights are harming millions of Americans, and they are receiving free gifts and contributions from individuals who want to influence those rulings. I'm committed to fighting for justice and integrity in our government. And on top of that, alongside Congressman Jamie Raskin, I have introduced legislation to cap justices' gifts to $50, which is the same rule that members of Congress have, that many other people across government have. You can't get a gift above $50 that is considered an ethical breach, and I think that the Supreme Court should be subject to the same rules as everybody else. So that's the update on our courts. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question regarding that or defiance, you can hit *3 on your phone. Now, lastly, I have a couple of constituent updates for you all that I think is very important that folks in our community right here in the Bronx and Queens really know about. We are launching the first ever Climate Justice Fellowship Plus program, and we're very excited to let our families and our local community know about this. My office collaborated with an agency known as NYSERDA, that is a New York State energy agency. And what we did was that we have now created and are rolling out the Climate Justice Fellowship Plus program, otherwise known as CJF Plus. This is a $3 million pilot program right here in the Bronx and Queens to advance climate justice. This program will provide an enhanced offering for nonprofit organizations to hire 16 to 24-year-olds and transitioning fossil fuel workers for clean energy positions. So once again, in order to describe what this really is about, is that we're putting $3 million into local nonprofit organizations. So if you are a nonprofit that you think qualifies or are interested in this, please reach out to my office. But this is for organizations to hire 16 to 24-year-olds for clean energy positions, and that includes everything from system design to installing heat pumps operation and maintenance related to energy efficiency and building electrification, renewable energy, energy storage, transit, and other eligible technologies for 2-year climate justice fellowships. So if you are 16 to 24 years old, or are soon going to be anywhere between 16 and 24 years old, and you're interested in how to install things like solar panels, heat pumps, other kinds of electrical systems, or renewable energy, and you're interested in learning about these systems, you're interested in acquiring the skills in how to develop these systems, or if you're an organization that wants to hire or can hire people to do that, please check it out. Our first class will serve up to 27 fellows, with up to 50 fellows total in the program overall. And NYSERDA has partnered with BronxWorks right here in Hunts Point to support fellows throughout the duration of the program. So fellows, if you are interested, if you're 16 to 24 years old, you must be a resident of our district of New York 14. And host organizations can be entering or currently working to advance climate justice and clean energy priorities for communities across the Bronx or Queens. The application deadline is February 12th. So we have a couple of months here, but I would really encourage people to apply as soon as possible. And on August 14th, next week, we will be hosting a virtual webinar to learn, so people can learn more about this opportunity. So once again, that's the Climate Justice Fellowship Plus program. If you are a climate nonprofit, or if you are between 16 and 24 and you're interested in this opportunity, please make sure that you follow up with my office. Number 2, in terms of of a constituent update, is that our summer EBT program is a new initiative that offers $120 food benefit for low-income families in the U.S. with eligible school-age children. So if you're a low-income family in our district, and you have a child in school, you are eligible for summer EBT. Most eligible school children in our district are automatically enrolled in the program, but some others might need to apply. So if you have any questions about that, I would either look it up online or you can call our office. Number 3 is I'm very excited to announce that eligible U.S. citizens, you can now renew your passport online. Woohoo! A lot of people might know, or if you have family or you tried to travel out of the country, our district is really diverse, and I know a lot of you have family abroad, and sometimes you book that ticket and then we forget to check if our passports are renewed, and then we find out that we actually need to renew our passports. And now I'm very excited to say that we don't have to deal with the mail and the appointments and all of that and the phones if you don't want to. You can now renew your passport online. The State Department is conducting a beta release, a test program of online passport renewals. My office has assisted hundreds of you in dealing with passport delays, and I also joined my colleagues in calling for passport application modernization. This is something that I've been working on alongside many other members of Congress to make sure that we can bring passport renewals online. And now, thanks to that and other initiatives, passport processing times are finally now back down to pre-pandemic level. You can get them renewed in as quickly as 2 weeks. So we're very excited and happy about that, and thrilled to announce that that is something now available to everyone in our district. Fourth, we have an issue of immigration fraud, and I want to make sure that we all provide an update on that. Unfortunately, immigration fraud and misinformation is on the rise in our communities. And I want to make sure that I clarify a few points for you all with everyone here today. Even if you do not have a case yourself, this could be helpful to your relatives or neighbors. So A, what is immigration fraud? Immigration fraud can mean presenting false or misleading documents or information to a government entity or private institution or employer, and unlawful conduct by a qualified legal representative or the provision of immigration legal advice and services by non-DOJ accredited and unbarred individuals. You can determine whether someone is bar accredited on the state bar's online member registry. DOJ accredited representatives are all listed on the Department of Justice website. Essentially, if you call someone and they are claiming to be a lawyer or they are claiming to be able to help you with immigration issues, and it turns out that they take a lot of your money to help process your case, and they run with it or they don't follow up and do what needs to be done, this can create massive problems for people in our community. People can become undocumented, or their path to citizenship can close if they are a victim of immigration fraud. So if someone has been falsely presenting themselves as a lawyer or otherwise behaving in this kind of way, we have to make sure that we, A, prevent that by ensuring that someone is bar accredited before handling your immigration case, and B, we want to make sure that you have the resources necessary if this is something that happens to you or someone you love. So if you or anyone you know is a victim of immigration fraud, it's important to seek qualified legal advice and report it right away. Reporting to the U.S. Department of Justice and the New York State Attorney General's Office of Immigration Service fraud is a crucial first step in deterring potential bad actors. It's really important that we look out for these issues, and I understand that immigration is a profoundly sensitive topic, especially with undocumented neighbors in our community. It can be very scary to be a victim of immigration fraud, and you may not think that you have any recourse. I want you to know that even if you are undocumented, especially if you are undocumented, you can reach out to my office. We have privacy disclosure forms. We will make sure that we can confide in people and that you can approach us in confianza. Don't worry. But we need to make sure that if someone is hurting people in our community, including hurting undocumented people in our community, we need to know and we need to make sure that that comes to an end. So please visit our website or give us a call if that is something that you have encountered. And lastly, please visit our website at ocasio-cortez.house.gov to subscribe to our grants newsletter. You can receive more info on federal opportunities and resources and stay up to date on upcoming events and other grant opportunities. So once again, that kind of wraps up my spoken portion and my update for this town hall. And let's get to the questions. You can press *3 in order to ask a question, and I'm excited for us to get to the first caller.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And just as a quick reminder, folks, if you would like to participate in this evening's event in Spanish, please press *0 on your telephone keypad. Congresswoman, the first question comes from Stephen in Jackson Heights. And Stephen wants to ask about the Infrastructure and Job Act. He's wondering how we can work together to have funding, and he asks, is it too late?
Well, I think this is an excellent question. And in fact, Stephen, I'm very happy to announce that we actually have already gotten to work in getting some of the dollars from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act to our community. There's a couple of examples that we have right off of the bat. And a lot of the money and projects that we're starting to fund are also, I think, they are very strong investments in changing the kinds of infrastructure that we have in our district. So it's not just repairing the things that are broken, but also shifting them and improving them for our climate priorities and our public health priorities. So I'm going to give you two examples. One is that we helped secure, I believe, about $25 million into the Hunts Point produce market. And one of the things that we're really funding out here in Hunts Point is, for folks who don't know, in the Hunts Point part of our district, the Hunts Point produce market is one of the largest public-private produce markets in the world. A vast majority of the groceries and the produce that you get in your grocery store, whether you're in Queens or whether you're in the Bronx, when you go to the grocery store and you pick up a carrot or you pick up a head of lettuce, the odds are much of that has come through Hunts Point. And what that means is that an enormous amount of trucks go to Hunts Point. And it can sometimes be a major source of not just infrastructure wear and tear with potholes and our expressways, but also it's a large source of air pollution and a huge amount of childhood asthma and just general asthma surrounds Hunts Point. So we decided to approach, and I'm very thrilled to have worked with Secretary Buttigieg on this, as well as our partners on the city and state level, to apply for this and say, listen, what if we started paving the way for electric truck infrastructure? We don't have a full fleet of electrified trucks right now in this moment, but they are coming. And when they come, we want to make sure that they can charge in our communities so that we can switch to clean trucks right away. And so we have $25 million coming into Hunts Point in order to help electrify some of the infrastructure here, as well as also upgrade to eco-friendly and use eco-friendly concrete, which is, folks may not know, but carbon emissions are an enormous, we get a lot of carbon emissions from construction and from concrete. And so by switching to lower impact concrete, we actually help and have a lot of health benefits to our community. Another way that we are introducing the Infrastructure and Jobs Act funding into our community is by addressing and using some of this in the Cross Bronx Expressway and also in other areas throughout the district, again, in Queens and the Bronx. We want to make sure that when we are reinvesting in some of our highways, bridges, and roads, that we're also not ignoring public transit, and we're not ignoring making our city more walkable and accessible to people who also don't have cars. And so we're starting to see some resources come in and around the Cross Bronx. We're starting to see resources come in and around Queens as well to help make sure that we can start taking bikes places, micro-mobility places, and that we're also repairing a lot of the potholes and other types of things that folks in cars also encounter as well. So we want to make sure that this is win-win-win for everyone across the board. It is certainly not too late for that. And the good news as well is that it's not just the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that we're getting money from. We're also getting money from the Inflation Reduction Act through federally funded programs to help people lower their energy costs and switch to solar and have our communities switch to solar and offshore wind. So all of these things are starting to click together. And if you're interested in some of the more federal grants and dollars from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that are coming to our local community, our office is happy to point you to some resources that give you the full list of all of the millions of dollars we're getting from the IJA, as well as the IRA and several other pieces of legislation as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question is from Janice in Astoria. Janice asks, why isn't there a national conversation on what is considered a living wage? How do we get that conversation started?
That is a fantastic question, Janice. In fact, in prior sessions, I have introduced legislation that talks about how we reassess living wage. One of the big problems that we're currently dealing with is actually how we measure poverty. A lot of times we talk about the poverty line, but that poverty line it's actually crazy, but what determines the poverty line is several decades old, and the poverty line makes some wild assumptions. When we measure poverty and we say, how much do you need to make? We assume, believe it or not, because this was a measure that was first developed in the 50s or 60s, we assume, the federal government assumes, that you have a full-time caretaker at home that is caring for your children. They assume that you have a stay-at-home spouse. They assume that you do not need internet. They assume that your food and your caloric intake is one of the primary costs that you have. And if this sounds totally crazy to you in terms of how we measure poverty and how we essentially measure what a living wage is, that's because it is crazy. It's because these were measures that were drafted in around the 1960s, where we were largely measuring how much money an employed, at that time, an employed man with a stay-at-home wife needs to make in order to put food on the table. This was before internet, this was before people were paying a lot of money for phones, and this was certainly before the housing crisis that is before us today. And so one of our major things that we need to do is, you're exactly right, have an entire relitigation about not just what is the measure of poverty, but what a living wage means. So in terms of how we start that national conversation, there is some good news here. First and foremost, I have previously introduced legislation for us to overhaul how we measure poverty in America. And that is legislation that I introduced, I believe, in 2020. I can look that back up for you. And part of a larger suite of legislation around economic justice in America. But secondly, and one of the things that I also want to center on that is that we are starting to kick this conversation back up by working with our union labor partners and starting to inject minimum standards for pay and helping with our labor and our union partners to help push for that. So I'm very excited for that. In terms of momentum in the House, when we last had the House majority, the House passed a $15 minimum wage, but we know now that, first of all, this was pre-COVID, but we know now that we're well past that. We're well past $15 now. $15 was the demand about 10 or 15 years ago, so we're going to have some updating to do as the cost of living has skyrocketed. The other thing that we also need to tackle in terms of cost of living is corporate abuse of power. We need to do a lot of trust busting, and we need to do a lot of attacking monopoly power, because living wages, that number is only going to keep going up and up and up if these companies keep abusing their monopoly power in order to make prices go up and up and up just because they can, and just because they're bragging on their Wall Street earnings that they can now make things very expensive. And so to that end, we have been working with Lena Khan at the FTC, and she has been going after a lot of these companies that are abusing their market power and really fleecing everyday working families by making everything from paper towels to your plane tickets to see your families back home way more expensive than they need to be. And lastly, it's housing that we're also making sure that we need to attack head on. And so I completely agree with you. We need a complete overhaul in not just making sure that we're paying people a living wage, but also that we're updating how we measure what a living wage is.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I want to remind our listeners, please press *3 if you'd like to ask a question. And if you're enjoying this update, I encourage you to press *6 on your telephone keypad now to sign up for Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's newsletter. Again, that's *6 to get on the email update list. And if you'd like to participate in this evening's event in Spanish, you can press *0. Congresswoman, our next question is from Jasmine in the Bronx. Jasmine asks, what do you plan on doing to have the child tax credit renewed?
Yes, okay. Thank you for asking this question, Jasmine. The child tax credit is one of, I want to tell you that restoring the child tax credit is one of the highest and top priorities that not only I have as your member of Congress, but I'm happy to say that we have been advocating so much that it is now one of the top priorities that we have in the Democratic Party, period. Now, in terms of the current state of play, right now, Republicans have the majority in the House. Democrats have the majority in the Senate, and we have the presidency in the White House. Republicans, they refuse. They will not extend the child tax credit, but we'll see what happens in the election. If we're able to get, and my hope is that we will be able to get a Democratic majority in November, one of the top orders of business is not just restoring the child tax credit, but making it permanent, making the child tax credit permanent. And it's so important that we do that, because I know from so many of you all that the child tax credit not only transformed your life, not only did it make so many of us much more capable of affording our groceries, or sending or being able to buy diapers, or being able to even just send our kids to a summer camp for a week. It wasn't just transformative in that aspect, but I want everybody to know that the child tax credit cut child poverty in half in the entire United States. In half. So this one policy, this one child tax credit, and for folks who aren't as aware, it's when during COVID, if you are a parent or a working parent, when you got those monthly checks for your kids, it was transformative. And it was almost like a switch went off, and we turned that switch from off to on, and we cut child poverty in half in America. Now, what happened was that it needed to get renewed, and Senator Joe Manchin prevented the extension because it was a one vote. It was a very slim margin in the Senate, and so one individual prevented the extension of the child tax credit and essentially doubled child poverty in America. But we now have a Senate majority, and I believe that if we're able to secure a Democratic House majority, I can tell you, Rosa DeMuro, she is a leader in the U.S. House Appropriations Committee, which is in charge of the child tax credit. She is fully on board, and our hope is that in January of next year, if we have a trifecta, one of the first things that we want to do is make sure that we restore and extend the child tax credit, because it is way too important. Babies cannot go hungry in this country, and if we can do something about it, we have a moral obligation to do it as quickly as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Your next question comes from Annette in Corona. Annette asks, well, she actually makes a statement, ma'am. We haven't had a library in several years since the last hurricane. What can be done?
Annette, I'm assuming that the library you're talking about might be the library in Lafrac City that got flooded. I have to see, because just to be transparent, this year and last year, they, due to the census and the redistricting process, Corona was essentially sliced up a little bit. And so I used to have the library in Lafrac City as part of my district. And so if you're used to me being there and you haven't seen me lately, it's because now that line has been updated, and you have if you're talking about the Lafrac Library, you have a new Congresswoman in Grace Meng in having that library. But the overall point that you're making is critically important. What I can do is that I can commit to following up with our Chancellor of the Queens Library System, Dennis Walcott, and see what is going on in terms of our programming. I know we have, I know that the Lafrac Library is not the only library in Corona. We have another in the area, I believe closer to the East Elmhurst area, but also near the train station. And so I want to make sure that I follow up on that with you. One of the things that I want to be transparent about is that, you know, I'm your Congresswoman. I operate on the federal level. On the city level, if you have been seeing that libraries have been closed lately, it is because we have been going through city-level budget cuts that have been consistently threatening our library system. So a lot of, on the city level, in terms of the mayoral administration, what we are seeing has been proposed cuts to our library systems, and that's why we have seen service cutbacks at the library. Even in the Astoria pool, If you all visit the Astoria pool, the entire pool isn't always opened up because there have been budget cuts for hiring lifeguards there. So this is something, as I'm going to take my Congresswoman hat off and just put my neighbor hat on as a constituent here in the district. It's a big problem that we want to make sure that we turn our advocacy to. Now, there's been some restoration. After some of those cuts were announced, a lot of our neighbors started getting active and protesting this, and some of those cuts were restored. But you're totally right that we do need overall more investment in our library branches in the Corona neighborhood. And so I'm happy to speak with Chancellor Walcott and see if there's a plan that we can start putting together. I would also very much encourage you to contact your local city council member. Depending where you are in Corona, or where you are in Queens, it could be a different person. So I would look up who your city council member is, and they are your easiest avenue to make sure that we get some progress in libraries in the area.
Thank you, ma'am. Your next question comes from Jürgen in Astoria. The question is, what is Congress doing in terms of election safety to make sure election deniers are not put in position?
Well, this is a team effort, no? This is a really important issue, and frankly, one of the first things that we need to do is make sure that we win elections on the House level. Right now, as I mentioned, Republicans have the majority in the House. Many of those Republicans have denied or tried to overturn the results of the U.S. presidential election in 2020. And so it is a very real threat to our democracy that the folks in charge of protecting it have also been part of undermining it. Now, as far as our electoral system goes, I think we have some of these fights right here in our own backyard. There are 6 swing seats right here in the state of New York. A lot of people don't know that. And so when I talk about whether Republicans or Democrats have the majority in the House, one of the things that is important for us to know is that New York is the tipping point. New York is the deciding state, and our communities are the deciding communities as to whether we're going to have a Democratic majority or a Republican majority in the House next year. And so a lot of those races are determined in places like Westchester County, in Long Island. There are even, I believe, some swing places that have some footprint in Queens, or a piece of footprint in Queens. So I would definitely encourage you to get involved if this is an issue that you care about, and look into some of the 6 spots right here in New York that will help determine whether we're going to have election deniers or not in the U.S. House of Representatives. Because right here in the state of New York, we have 6 seats that determine the majority. That is how slim the margin is. And if we can send Democrats in the state of New York, then we can change that outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question comes from Celso in Corona. The question is, what do you think progressives can get accomplished this year, and how can we get the MTA employees supported better?
Could you repeat that last half of the question, please?
Yes, of course. The last half of the question is, and how can we get the MTA, Mary Tom Adam, employees supported better?
Oh, great. Fabulous. 2 fabulous questions. Well, first and foremost, Celso, in terms of what we can get done in the next couple of months, I actually think there's a lot that we can get done. Something that I think is an underrated factor here is that now that President Biden has announced that he will not be seeking his own reelection, but passing the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, what we have here is a dynamic where he still very much wants to run through the tape and finish his own presidential term strong. Now, remember, even though we have an election in November, we do not officially have a new president until January around January 20th or 21st of next year. And so there is still about 6 months left of President Biden's term. With Republicans having a House majority, what Congress itself can accomplish can be very limited. But the president has a very strong power of his own pen, using the power of executive action and executive order. And so I want to communicate to you all what some of my top priorities have been. In terms of progressive priorities and in terms of our local district, when we talk about and look at the asylum seeker crisis or the refugee crisis that we're seeing in terms of many people that are coming into the United States, but not just asylees, but also here in New York City, you know, on a macroeconomic level, we actually do need this level of immigration right now due to the labor shortages that we have. We still have millions of open positions in the United States that are largely suited for first-generation families. So the kinds of work that a lot of people start their American story, their family's American story with, whether that's home health care aides or whether it's agricultural work. But the problem is that a lot of these folks cannot legally be authorized to work. And one of the major issues that we're seeing is that, you know, people want to work. We have Americans that want to hire folks to work, but there's all of this bureaucracy and red tape in the way. And when we look at the source of asylum seekers, they are primarily coming, a large volume of them are coming from Venezuela and Ecuador. Ecuador is the number 3 lately. I mean, of course, these numbers shift, but Ecuador has historically been the number 3 source of asylum seekers, particularly here in New York City. Number 1 was Venezuela. And the problem is not that we have new neighbors. The problem is that our new neighbors are not being allowed to work. And when we talk and when I speak with them in some of our systems, even in shelters when they check in, they say, I don't want a handout. I just want to be allowed to work. I want to be able to support myself. And I want to be able to do that. And so we fought for something known as TPS for Venezuelans, temporary protected status, which will dramatically shorten the amount of wait time that an asylum seeker or an asylee has to wait in order to get authorized to get work papers as the rest of their situation gets figured out. And about last year, the year before, we worked really, really hard to see if we could get TPS for Venezuelans, and we successfully did that. And what we were able to do, I mean, believe it or not, people would have to wait sometimes years to be allowed to work. And we were able to cut that down in half, and that, I believe, really contributes to lowering the volume of the strain on our systems. But we still have other communities, and especially in Queens, we have a beautiful Ecuadorian community that could really benefit from TPS. And our Ecuadorian community, in gaining TPS, will really free a lot of people in our community to come out of the shadows and be able to work in a documented fashion that is dignified. And by the way, a lot of our folks want to hire them. A lot of members of our community need to fill these jobs and want to hire our neighbors to fill these jobs. So in terms of some of our progressive priorities in the next couple of months, I have been raising the issue to President Biden about securing TPS. A second one is I will let you all know that one of the things that I have been starting to work on is some social housing legislation that we hope to be unveiling in the next 1 to 2 months with a really great Senate partner. You can hear from that soon. We have not officially introduced it yet, but I'm sure by the next time we have our next town hall, we should be getting some much more updates on that. But I'm very, very excited to share that progress with you all quite soon. And I also believe that President Biden will be looking into using his executive authority in order to make progress in a lot of other areas as well, and whether that is in criminal justice, whether it is in they've mentioned considering rescheduling cannabis. And if cannabis is taken off Schedule 1, then it will essentially not be as criminalized, and we can start working on expunging people's criminal records who got caught up in the unjust war on drugs, especially in the 90s and early 2000s. And so I do think that there is some work that we can do, but a lot of it in terms of the biggest and most important stuff, like the child tax credit, or even seeing if we can expand Medicare and Medicaid, that's going to take a Democratic House majority, and that's what our elections are going to decide. So it's not just a presidential election, it's our House and Senate elections that are really going to be determining the tipping balance here as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question. We've got Wanda from the Bronx. Wanda asks, what can you do about getting the White House to increase the number of Supreme Court justices?
Well, Wanda, I agree with you. I think that we need to expand the court. Sometimes I will let you know, and I'm on your side. I agree. I believe that we need to expand the court. I will tell you when I hear pushback, one of the pushback points that sometimes people will say is, oh, well, if we expand the court, then once Republicans get a majority, then they can just expand it. One of the things that I want to say is that, first and foremost, the number of justices on the court, once again, is not constitutionally mandated, as I'm sure you already know, and that number has changed in the past. Now, what makes the most sense is for us to have not 9 Supreme Court justices, but I believe the number is 13 Supreme Court justices. And the reason for that is because we would essentially have 1 Supreme Court justice for every circuit court. So there are different federal circuit courts. We have 13 federal circuits. We should have 1 Supreme Court justice for each circuit court. And so to me, I think that is personally a number that reflects the growing diversity of this country. The last time, I don't want to misquote the number, but I believe it's probably been over 100 years since the number of Supreme Court justices have been updated, but the population of our nation has increased dramatically. And so more Supreme Court justices will accurately reflect the expansion of the U.S. population, and it will I believe, much more substantively reflect the diversity of our country. Now, I will tell you that this is an area of disagreement between President Biden and myself. President Biden is not of that opinion, but that has not stopped me from kind of twisting his ear a little bit and really talking to him about the importance of this. And as a result, I believe that he has been convinced thoroughly of the importance and urgency to act on the courts. And while he has not come out in terms of court expansion yet, he has come out in favor of some pretty dramatic reforms so far on the courts, one of them being term limits. And so that would mean that once we have a Supreme Court justice, they are not appointed for life, but they are appointed for a defined set of terms, which would ensure that we don't have the balance of our courts determined by essentially when a justice passes away. And so this to me is a system that makes no sense, that we're just going to govern by coincidence, that we're just going to wait for a justice to pass away, and whoever happens to be elected in the White House, whatever party happens to be in the White House at that time, is what determines the Supreme Court. And let's not even dig into the fact that Donald Trump committed crimes to win his election. A court found, that's what one of his major court settlements found, was that this is what the real issue with the Stormy Daniels case really was. I mean, a lot of people focus on the fact that Stormy Daniels was a sex worker, but really what this was about is that Donald Trump paid someone to cover up something that he could have potentially lost the election on. And he committed a crime. he committed a rather grave transgression. And so what that meant was that in that cover-up, he won an election, and he was able to appoint a Supreme Court supermajority that is appointed for life, and also has major ethics problems of themselves. So although President Biden has not come out in terms of court expansion, term limits would also be effective in encouraging some turnover on the court as well, which would also be a dramatic step forward. In addition to that, of course, in addition to term limits, President Biden, we've also been able to push and advocate, and in that advocacy, President Biden has also come out for significant judicial ethics reforms that I believe would also result in some turnover in the court so that we can restore the balance to our nation.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We have time for one more question. We've got a question from Lenice in Astoria. She asks, are there any updates on student loan forgiveness, or can Congress decide who can qualify for such relief?
Thank you, Lenice. Yes, there are some updates on student loan forgiveness. One of the things that I would say and that I would recommend is to definitely go to the Department of Education's website, because the status of student loan forgiveness has been updating pretty significantly and repeatedly over the last several months. We are seeing the Biden administration roll out student loan forgiveness in chunks and in waves. And the reason for this, as many of you all who are affected by this issue know, is that the Biden administration tried to roll out student loan forgiveness in a very broad way. And speaking of the Supreme Court then blocked him. They then stopped him, and they said you cannot release student loan forgiveness in a broad cancellation for a large class of people. So after receiving that devastating ruling for the Supreme Court, I encouraged the Biden administration to not give up and say, okay, if we can't forgive with a broad stroke, what we then want to do is push to forgive in lots of smaller communities and waves that are much more defined to the letter of the law. And it has been working. But what it's meant is that student loan forgiveness has been rolling out in waves. In fact, a friend of mine who works at a nonprofit organization serving kids in Texas just got his student loans forgiven this week. And so I would really encourage you to continue to look into the Department of Education's website. I believe one of the more recent developments is that if you qualified for a PLUS loan, that was that new program that rolled out about a year or two ago. If you qualified for that, there were some actions that were taken on your behalf there. So I would revisit the website, and that's in terms of the next 6 months, right? We can see what is also possible and doable once we win back these majorities. But in terms of our overall argument, we have leaned on the executive authority to do this because our argument has been that Congress has already authorized this kind of action to happen through the Higher Education Act, the HEA. And in the Higher Education Act, we give the Secretary of Education as well as the President the ability, the fiduciary ability to cancel student loans. That is our legal argument. So, if you ask one of us, I would tell you we've already done that so that we don't have to do it again. But that being said, the door is not closed to further congressional action. I just think it's easier if we say, and if we point out the fact that we've already provided this authority. But once again, the Supreme Court has added some legal wrinkles, and I think it's definitely something that we can iron out if and when we get a House majority back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Before we end the call, ma'am, would you like to share your final thoughts on this evening's telephone town hall?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody, again, so much for joining us for our Teletown Hall tonight. All of your questions were so substantive and fantastic, and I think one of the benefits to people raising and answering these questions is that a lot of times there are many other people in our community that have similar questions, and they really benefit from hearing the answers to the questions that you all raised. So thank you so much to everyone who came with such wonderful, incredible questions. We'll make sure that we follow up. If there are any that were left unanswered, we want to make sure that you get an answer as well. And again, thank you all so much. Thank you to my staff and to my team. And if you all call in, please give them a thank you too. They work so incredibly hard to put this together and to also make sure that they field all of your cases. And thank you to our moderator, Robin, for making sure that we are organized and on time and really opening up with such a warm tone. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you everyone for joining tonight's telephone town hall with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If you haven't spoken to a member of our team yet about subscribing to the newsletter, please stay on the line. At the sound of the tone, spell out your name and email address slowly. Thanks so much and have a blessed evening. Good night, everyone.